Good morning. I will call this meeting to order. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation and Public Works Committee. This day, April 17, 2018. I am chairing the committee. I'm Councilmember Reich. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Palmisano, Johnson, Fletcher, Gordon, and Bender. We are a quorum and we'll proceed with today's agenda. On today's agenda, we have 17 items, many of which are in consent. I will note that we will be postponing item 17, which is the discussion item, as that's a contract that there are some last minute further refinements that will be necessary, and we feel that it's most appropriate to have it well baked and ready to go for presentation. But there will be a related action that we will be carrying forward with, which is the foundational action with the bike sharing ordinance, which has to be in place before anything else can be amended. I will go through the items on consent. I note that we'll be pulling item 14 for further discussion, so staff be prepared for that questioning from a committee member. Item 6 is the Minneapolis Stormwater Management Program Annual Report. Item 7 is the large event and amplified sound permit for Ninja Warrior, May 19th through the 28th. Item 8 is the agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for landscape improvements at Lyndale Split at the Dunwoody Boulevard. Item 9 is the Minnesota Green Corps Program, application to host Green Corps members for 2018 and 2019 program year. Item 10 is the PV Plaza Orchestra Hall Park use restriction removal and easement agreement. Item 11 is a bid for Old Bassett Creek sediment removal project. Item 12 is a bid for gray black colored Class A aggregate. Item 13 is the bid for Bassett Creek main stem stabilization project. 14 will pull. Item 15 is the bid for Emerson and Fremont bicycle pedestrian improvement project. And item 16 is the bid for Hennepin Avenue South Street reconstruction project. We'll be pulling 14. Does the committee wish to pull any other items? Seeing none, I will move all items minus 14. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. We will now pull 14 for discussion. I'll yield the floor to Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Is there any staff here to? Thank you.
I'm the parking system manager for the city of Minneapolis and would be happy to answer questions regarding the surveillance camera.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say I'm not necessarily pulling this because I think it's a bad idea, but I think it's good for the city enterprise as in general to get in the practice of publicly discussing surveillance items as they come up, so that people understand how and with what technology they're being watched. So if I could just ask a few questions about how this proposal is going to have an impact or how it might change things. The first is, does this proposal expand camera coverage, or is it just replacing existing surveillance in the parking lot?
The majority of this project is replacing existing cameras. These cameras are older cameras, a lot of black and white ones, and ones that are not doing a good job. So these replace with newer technology. About less than 1%, there's a total of 1,200 cameras. Less than 1% of those are new cameras, and they're to fill voids where we did a study around all of the 16 parking ramps that the city runs, and found some spots that weren't being covered. So these are to fill in those voids.
And who has access to and monitors the video feed?
We have a security center. So there is one security center that has a lot of monitors in it. It has professional security staff hired by the city of Minneapolis to run our ramps, and they're the only ones that monitor those as far as the city is concerned. Some buildings, like the federal building, we share with the feds, and they will also get feeds to those cameras as well.
Is this the security center housed at the first precinct, or is it a separate security center for the
separate one? It's housed in the Hawthorne Transportation Center. Okay,
great, thank you. And that's who has control of the pan, zoom, tilt functions?
That's correct. They have control of that, and none of the facilities that we share with have control of the pan, tilt, zoom at all. They just get the camera feeds themselves.
Gotcha. And it's MPD or it's City of Minneapolis staff, or it's contractors?
It is contractors. The ramps that we have, we hire out a company called ABM to maintain and operate the ramps, and then they also hire a security company called Securitas. They're professionally trained to monitor cameras.
Okay. And do they have protocols dictating how they use the pan, tilt, zoom functions to make sure that we're not unduly targeting particular people coming through the ramps?
Yeah, they're professionally trained, so they do have that as part of the training, is how the cameras will be monitored.
Okay. And does that professional training include civil liberties or privacy training as a part of that?
My understanding is it does. I can double check on that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is the footage saved and stored?
The footage is saved for a period of time, and then it's destroyed. It's overwritten, basically, is what it's called. So, for example, if it were a 14-day retention period, then on day 15, day 1 would be overwritten, and that would be permanently destroyed, as you would say, or overwritten.
And is that the retention period? Is it 14 days?
The retention period for the new cameras is, it hasn't been decided yet. The old cameras, it's anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. And because as we built the system, the ramps were built at different times and the functionality can completely change. So we're looking at a retention period of somewhere between 2 weeks and 30 days, basically.
Okay, and that'll be some kind of written enforceable policy once
It will,
that's
yes.
determined. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And are these being used in conjunction with either license plate scanning or facial recognition technology, or has there been a discussion about the potential to implement those technologies as a part of the surveillance system in the future?
The goal of this project is just to replace the existing cameras and, for the safety and concern of the public using the parking ramps. So those haven't been discussed, and we have no intention of using those at this time.
Okay.
Those different license plate recognition or facial recognition or anything like that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think that's all of my questions, and I certainly think that there's a public benefit to having security coverage of the parking ramps. I know that's an area that people have expressed concern about, and appreciate you putting some thought into this and answering these questions today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I have staff up to answer questions on this. I know that previously there were concerns around the sourcing of a product called Hikvision for these camera replacements. It was cameras that are owned by the Chinese government, which have serious cybersecurity flaws that the FBI put a warning out about specifically. With this acceptance of this bid, I'm wondering, is the actual source product still Hikvision that Public Works was looking at, or that we're expecting to be installed, or has that shifted away to a different end product?
Councilmember Reich, Councilmember Johnson, Hikvision did not submit anything, so Hikvision is not one of the companies that submitted to this particular bid.
And we just, to clarify, so Egan Company is not going to be using their products?
They are not, no.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you. And any other questions while we have staff? See none. Thank you for those clarifying inquiries. And I will move the item before us, item 14, which is the acceptance of a bid for Minneapolis Parking Surveillance Project. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That item carries. And now we can move to the public hearing section of our agenda. Good morning, Deputy Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Larry Matsumoto with our Transportation Maintenance and Repair Division will do the presentations.
Good morning.
Good morning, committee chair, members of the committee. My name is Larry Matsumoto, and I am in the Transportation Maintenance Repair Division. I am here today to present to you 4 public hearings and the request to approve passage of resolution for those 4 public hearings. The first public hearing I'm here to discuss with you is the 40th Street West Resurfacing Project, and to request the passage of a resolution ordering the work to proceed and adopting special assessments in the amount of $29,917.66, and the passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimation and Taxation to authorize the city issuance of sale and of assessment bonds in the amount of $29,920 for the 40th Street West Resurfacing Project. 40th Street was built in 1980 and it has a current PCI of 65. The engineer's estimate for all of the work for this year is $8.3 million for the work. The approximate length of 40th Street West is 26 miles. The proposed scope of work is a mill and overlay. There currently is no utility work planned for the work, and there is a bike lane improvements along this section of roadway. Public Works hosted a community meeting on February 7th and a pre-public meeting with the affected property owners. 37 invitations were mailed out with 1 attendee in attendance on our April 11th meeting, which was scheduled at the Lyndale farmstead. The project was designated at this committee on February 9th, and we are requesting the passage of these resolutions.
Thank you. Any questions per the presentation by staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing for item 1, the 40th Street West resurfacing project. Anyone signed in? Clerk indicates no one signed in. Does anyone wish to come forward to make comment? Does anyone wish to make comment? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move the item before us. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries, and we can now move to item 2.
Mr. Chair, Larry Matsumoto will do this presentation as well.
Thanks.
The second public hearing I am here to present to you is the Emerson Avenue North resurfacing, and to recommend the passage of a resolution ordering the work to proceed and adopting a special assessments in the amount of $132,973.51, and to authorize the passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimation and Taxation to authorize the city's issuance and sale of assessment bonds in the amount of $132,975 for the Emerson North resurfacing project. Emerson Avenue North was originally built in 1983 with a current PCI of 66. The estimated cost for all of the resurfacing work for this year is $8.3 million, and the approximate length of Emerson Avenue is 1/2 mile. The project scope is a 2-inch mill and overlay with approximately 1,000 feet of existing curb and gutter replacement. Presently, there is no utility work planned, and there are new bike lanes proposed. Public Works hosted a community meeting on Monday, April 3rd and April 9th with 77 invitations mailed. There was one attendee who attended the April 10th meeting, and the project is scheduled for summer construction. The project was designated at this committee on February 9th of 2018.
Are there any questions per this presentation? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. No one has signed in. Does anyone wish to come forward? Anyone wish to come forward and give testimony? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move the item before us, item 2. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. We can go to item 3, at which I believe we have Mr. Matsumoto's presentation.
Good morning, committee chair and members of the committee. I'm here to present the third public hearing, 24th Street East and West resurfacing, and to recommend the passage of a resolution ordering the work to proceed and adopting special assessments in the amount of $170,359.60 for the 20th Street East and West resurfacing program, and the passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimation and Taxation to authorize the city's issuance and sale of assessment bonds in the amount of $170,360 for the 24th Street East and West resurfacing project. 24th Street East and West was built under 2 separate years. The first year from Hennepin to Nicollet in 1971. That section has a PCI of 71, and the section from Nicollet to 3rd was built in 1978 with a PCI of 65. The estimated cost for all of the resurfacing work for this year is $8.3 million, and the approximate length of 24th Street East and West is 1.05 miles. The present scope of work is to do a 2-inch mill and overlay with approximately 500 feet of existing curb and gutter replacement. Presently, there is no utility work planned, and there are proposed 2 new bike lanes on 24th Street. Public Works hosted a community meeting on Monday, April 3rd and April 9th with 146 invitations mailed and only 2 attendees attending the April 9th meeting. The project was designated at this committee on February 9th of 2018.
Thank you. Any questions per the staff presentation of this project? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. No one has signed in. Does anyone wish to come forward? Anyone wish to come forward to give comment? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move the item before us. Is there any further discussion from the committee? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. And we go to our final road public hearing.
Committee Committee Chair and members of the committee, this is the Lyndale Whittier Residential Resurfacing public hearing and the final of 4 public hearings for this morning. I am here to recommend the passage of a resolution ordering the work to proceed and adopting special assessments in the amount of $1,817,558.74 for the Lyndale and Whittier South residential areas, and the passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimation and Taxation to authorize the city's issuance and sale of assessment bonds in the amount of $1,817,560 for the Lyndale and Whittier South residential area street resurfacing program. The history behind these 2 programs is that in 1976, Lyndale residential area was paved out with a current PCI of 55. In 1983, Whittier residential was paved with a current PCI of 56. The current estimated cost for the resurfacing work for this year is $8.3 million. The approximate length of both combined residential areas is 8.26 miles. The project scope is a 2-inch mill and overlay with approximately 3,700 feet of existing curb and replacement. CenterPoint Energy has indicated that they do have small gas main and service replacements in many of the areas, and there is no other planned work for these 2 areas. Public Works hosted a community meeting on Monday, April 4th and April 12th with 1,610 invitations mailed. There were a total of 3 attendees who came to the April 4th and 13 attendees who came to the April 12th meeting to discuss the scope of work of the project. The project was designated at this committee on February 9th of 2018.
Any questions per the presentation? I'll make an observation. If I'm correct, I think the color coding of the neighborhoods might be off. It's backwards. Whittier should be blue and Lyndale should be magenta.
The color coding,
So it indicates the Lyndale neighborhood with blue, but that area is the Whittier neighborhood?
and the other is maroon.
Correct.
They're reversed.
Correct. But I'm sure that can be modified down the road.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, I will, any other questions? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing for item 4, the Lyndale Whittier South Residential Area Street Resurfacing. Anyone sign in? No one signed in. Does anyone wish to come forward? Anyone wish to come forward to comment? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move the item as submitted with the one little color coding notation. I will, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that we got a couple of comments from my constituents in the Whittier portion of this project that had a lot of interest in ADA accessibility upgrades in the neighborhood, and we've been able to get some of those done along Franklin Avenue. As Councilmember Reich knows this neighborhood well, it's an older part of the city. A lot of the curb ramps are not ADA accessible, and it's also a part of town that has a large transit dependent population and a lot of people who choose to walk and take transit every day. And the Whittier School and Park are right there in this project area. So while those kinds of upgrades are outside the scope of this resurfacing project, we were able to connect the constituents to our staff who are managing the ADA accessibility program. And, I'm just wanted to highlight that because I think this work that we're doing to upgrade our ramps is so important, for folks who have mobility issues, as well as just the greater population that's trying to get around with strollers and children walking to school. Just makes a huge difference to have those ramps be, not sort of leading people into traffic. And so I'm thankful for the staff who were able to answer those constituent questions and who are making sure that these ADA ramp upgrades are happening.
Thanks for highlighting that, Councilmember, and I will echo the notion that if there's ever an area where there's a dense need for that type of improvement, this would be the area. Not only is it densely populated, but the constituency makeup is pretty intensely dependent on these improvements. Several different social service groups that specifically are for the disability communities. So if there's ever a place to do that, this would be the place. So appreciate that. With that, if there's no further discussion, I move the item. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Dissenting, name. That carries. And we can now go to our last item, which is of a different category. Deputy Director.
Mr. Chair, John Wirtjes, Director of Traffic and Parking Services, will present.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is John Wirtjes, Director of Traffic and Parking Services for the city. Before you today for public hearing is passage of an ordinance amending Title 18 and Chapter 490 related to bike sharing elements. And maybe just a little bit of overview on the item. This includes today our operation, which is a docked bike share system, also is contemplating the aspect of dockless bike share in the city as that technology changes. In recognition of those elements, it made sense for us to proceed down a path of updating our ordinance to be reflective of what may be coming forward in that regards. And so through those dialogues and efforts, city staff have defined some parameters related to how we directly address bike sharing and have added them to the ordinance as proposed, and I'll talk about some of those details in a moment. Likewise, trying to balance with these proposals the aspects of public safety and welfare and how we guide and encourage the operations of bike share and bike use throughout the city. And so with that, there are basically, I characterize it as two basic changes to this ordinance. One is to add a section, or Article 4, which relates directly to the bike sharing operations. It does basically three things. It defines what bike sharing is, both in a docked and a traditional docked model, as well as the dockless model. It also puts forth a requirement in order to have bike sharing and use the right-of-way. There needs to be an agreement with the city to use that right away. And then thirdly, it propagates some bike sharing regulations on how things may operate. So that's the additional element to this ordinance. The remaining articles 1, 2, and 3 have all been updated to be in alignment with what we just added relative to Article 4. Likewise, we found some inconsistency or some outdated elements in those Articles 1, 2, and 3 that we have also updated. So with that, Mr. Chair and Council Member, that's kind of a summary of this ordinance, and look forward to any comments or items that come forward in the public hearing.
Good. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. And I just have a question, and it's kind of maybe a nitpicky issue, and I don't necessarily want to make any changes. I think the bulk of the changes to provide for better bike sharing make a lot of sense. But I did notice there's a section on bicycle events, and it says no person shall conduct a bicycle event, parade, contest, or race without having first secured a proper permit. And I know that we require block permits to close streets and race permits to close streets for a race. But it occurred to me that's a little confusing. I'm not quite sure what a bicycle event is. I know a lot of schools do biking events and other activities that happen. And we certainly don't need permits for all of those. Can you talk a little bit about why we have that in the code?
Mr. Chair and Council Member Gordon, event's a pretty broad word there, and I would agree with you on that statement. I think you've hit on the key reasons why we have a way to permit events in a variety of ways through parades or races or other block event types of purposes. Some may define events as simply you and your friends riding down the street. I wouldn't necessarily put that in the category of an event. And so I'm not really sure the history behind this one. And so I'm not sure I could elaborate any more than that.
Well, I appreciated the change because this was just mostly old language.
Mm-hmm.
The old language said you had to secure a permit from the office of the mayor. And I don't think the mayor's office does permitting of anything anymore. And it did say a proper permit. So maybe I suppose if people can ask about their event and we'll say no permit is required and then they won't have to have one. I guess we'll leave it for now. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. And perhaps, creating some guideline for staff when they have to review what is and isn't could be useful for practical purposes moving forward. So with that, if there's no further questions for the presentation, I will open the public hearing. This is item 5, regulation of bicycle sharing ordinance rewrite. And I will go in order of people who signed in, starting with Mr. Ethan Foley. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Hi, Chair Reich, members of the committee. My name is Ethan Foley. I'm the executive director of Our Streets Minneapolis. Our Street supports the proposed ordinance change. I do want to note a couple things for you all. Specifically, in the ordinance change before you, you'll see that something is not being changed. We want to draw attention to, and that's section 490.140, where it says no person shall ride a bicycle upon a sidewalk within a business district or upon any sidewalk where prohibited by appropriate signage. Now, I would challenge that no one here can define a business district, and that probably no one enforcing this ordinance can define a business district. It is defined in state statute. I looked it up. A business district means the territory contiguous to and including a highway when 50% or more of the frontage thereon for a distance of 300 feet or more is occupied by buildings and used for business. Okay. So having heard that, I would still suggest that there is a lot of ambiguity in our city on what is a business district. Now, probably somewhere that is defined, but I would really question that the average person in our community, when traveling our city, knows when they are in a business district or not. There may be times, there are plenty of times when you probably would know, like say downtown, but there are plenty of times where it's ambiguous. And so I would ask that, not related to the changes before you today, but that separately, that the city look at more clearly defining and letting the public know where it is legal and not legal to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk. There are areas where we do mark on sidewalks that it's illegal to bike, but that's actually very rare, and I think further complicates people's understanding of where it would be legal and not legal to ride a bike on the sidewalk. And I recognize that this is a complicated issue where we're balancing pedestrian and bicycle safety. With also the recognition that the way that we have enforced this ordinance has probably traditionally been inequitable. And so we did a study, a police citation report a couple of years ago. One of the things that we found is, while we don't have data for everyone who was cited for riding a bicycle on the sidewalk, of those that led to a police report, more than 65% were African-American men. Now, it is not true. I don't think anyone can say that 65% of people bicycling on sidewalks in commercial districts, however we want to define that, are African-American men. And so we can't say definitively, but I think that there's something concerning there. And I think that we, as a city, I would also note that a lot of the cases where this enforcement is happening is on streets where it's terribly unsafe to bicycle, like Lake Street, the most common place that people are ticketed. That's the street I live on. It's terrifying to ride on a bicycle on the street on Lake Street. Now, we can argue whether people should be riding on the sidewalk, but there's no signage or anything saying that you shouldn't or it's illegal. Yet we have ticketed a lot of people, and some of those have led to police escalation and police reports. So that's concerning for us. We hope that the city will take a look at that and make some changes to make that clear. To the issue of dockless bike share more generally, as we said, we support the changes here. They set up smartly for the city to be able to license bike share providers, as you know, and they currently have an agreement with Nice Ride to provide bike share service. Nice Ride's done a great job. Our Streets Minneapolis supports a continued exclusive relationship with Nice Ride Minnesota for dockless bike share. So exclusivity is an important point here. We do support exclusivity, and I think there are a number of factors why. And this is, let me just be honest though, that this is fairly unique in the US, will be. I want to give a lot of credit to Nice Ride for bringing this forward. I want to give a lot of credit for city staff for the work that they've done on this. I think it's really thoughtful and valuable, and I think exclusivity provides the best potential for us to maximize the public good of dockless bike share. Now, Nice Ride will be working with the private company, and I have a lot of confidence in city staff and Nice Ride staff around this issue. But I think in exchange for exclusivity, within the details as presented to you all for the amended contract, which was delayed for a couple weeks, I realize, but within those details, I think that the city should be holding a little higher standard. Our Streets thinks the city should be holding a little higher standard for the expectations around equity within that exclusive agreement, to make sure that in exchange for exclusivity, that we are getting increased access and service across the city. Because the alternative would be opening up a private market where lots of companies can come in, and we think that that in the long term is not going to maximize the public good. But we want to make sure that the city is holding strong to getting something really good in exchange for exclusivity around equity pieces, and clarifying that, because it's not very clear what that means in the current language. I also note that we have a bit of concern that we're locking in with virtual stations as the model for serving parking of bike share bikes throughout the service area for the next 3 years. How we're managing bike sharing is changing rapidly, and we're still learning a lot. And this pilot period is a really good idea, and there's a lot of really smart thinking that goes into the virtual station concept that's included as part of the amended contract. But I think it's a little bit limiting to say that that's the only way that we can provide access to bike share bikes while maintaining a safe and accessible sidewalk and public right-of-way. We think that there should be a little bit of flexibility provided to be able to try different things and work between city staff and Nice Ride on how that looks, rather than locking in to say this is the only way for the next 3 years unless we come back to council that we can provide access to dockless bike share bikes. So those are our comments around the ordinance. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Moving down on my list here, Mr. Bill Gossett, please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Good morning, Councilmember Reich and council members. Thank you. Just a couple brief comments. First, I want to say that Nice Ride Minnesota supports this ordinance change. And then I want to say thank you. Thanks to the council for 8 years ago, really taking a chance on us. I think that what we're seeing around the world, a little bit it comes back to what started here in Minnesota. So there are 50 nonprofits in North America that followed the model that this council set in motion 9 years ago, I guess. And thank you for that. But I also really want to thank staff. Acting proactively in an industry that's changing this fast is really hard. I know that because I'm talking to my counterparts in other cities. And what I'm hearing is your staff is also talking to them. And they're coming to our public meetings and paying attention to all the changes that are happening and bringing forward, I think, a good ordinance proactively. I think that's terrific, and I want to thank them for doing that. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
I see none. Oh, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wondered if you could talk about Nice Ride's sort of past and future approach to equitable access to bicycles and how that's evolving as the technology models are changing with dockless bike sharing.
Thank you, Councilmember Bender. So if we look at the history of bike share, when we started, we were all about proof of concept, and I made a mistake. When I set out to prove concept, I thought, let's start in the area where it is most likely to get used the most. And when we did that, we heard from folks in North Minneapolis, no, it is really important that you launch here too. And they were right. And this council helped us take steps to address that very quickly. Over the next 4 years, really 2013, 2014, nationally, we saw a lot of investment in what we call better bike share. Philadelphia was really a leader in that, and the Better Bike Share partnership grew out of that. Nice Ride participated in that in a lot of ways, including launching our Nice Ride neighborhood program. I think we have learned a whole lot about how to make bike share work for everybody, and that there are different interventions that are needed in neighborhoods that may be less inclined towards active living. And that could be for lots of reasons. So we've learned those best practices. What we need to do now is figure out how to put those best practices into contracts, because we are no longer applying for federal grants for bike share. We're now going to be having private vendors put their money on the table to bring bike share into our city in the same way they're doing car share and TNCs and other things. I believe the city has a huge opportunity here. So it can contract for quality, for equity, for open access to data. And the way to do that is to rethink contracts in our right-of-way. They're going to be shorter term, like the one that's in front of you now, and they're going to be strategic, and they're going to focus on a technology contract and get public benefits like equity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I do want to note, I have a couple more questions, but I do want to note that we have a really unique opportunity here in Minneapolis because we have a contract existing with a nonprofit operator in Nice Ride that gives us so much more control over what's happening in a partnership to integrate some of these public benefits into the transition to dockless bike sharing. I think compared to a lot of the other cities where we're seeing cities having to really catch up to the market coming into their cities with bikes all over the place in some cases. And I think in other cases, the city had more time to be proactive. But here we have both an existing legal contract with Nice Ride that we intend to honor, but also a really important partnership where we've been able to work together to, again, meet, all kinds of shared goals that a public entity like the city and a nonprofit entity like Nice Ride can do together. I had two more questions that you kind of talked about just now. One is about the technology, about virtual stations, and we have some comments from our Bicycle Advisory Committee. I know you know Nick Mason, the chair, who sent us the comments very well. I know he's been involved in conversations with you guys. Could you talk about the technology around virtual stations and how it's evolving and some of the, it's not perfect yet right now, and what we can expect in accuracy when someone is looking for a bicycle, how they would know where it is, and how we can use that technology to try to make sure that there aren't bikes like all over the sidewalks in the city.
Sure.
And then my last question will be about data, just so you know.
Okay. So maybe a little background on dockless bikes. So right now there's really kind of three possible approaches. So one is the one that we've seen explode across 250 cities, which is really park anywhere legal. And there's a big problem with it is that people don't park just where it's legal. They park anywhere. So we have seen big piles of bikes and bikes blocking the right of way. That's not working. You can go to Dallas and see that it's not working. There are two other models out there. One is the lock to approach. So lock to something legal. There's some challenges with that in that it may, particularly in busy areas, consume more of your bike parking than you want it to. But it's also new. We don't have a lot of examples of that. The third approach, and the approach that we are really embracing and would really be leaders on, is what I would call a site planned designated parking zone approach. So what we need to do is create lots of places where that are easy to find for you to park a bike. And that's going to add a ton of order in our right of way, but it's also going to be tricky. We need a lot of these zones. It was tricky 8 years ago when we had to figure out where to put these bike share stations. I believe that the contract that the Public Works is bringing forward is going to give us the flexibility to do this very well. We're going to have to bring them site plans. They're going to have to approve them. And most importantly, we're going to do it in a very public way. So we're going to start by hiring a community design group to do a community engagement process and create a set of priorities and design goals for these virtual stations. Now, to the technology, the challenge is where you have big buildings, it's hard for satellites to know exactly where something is. Motivate is investing in technology to make that work better. I'm not going to get into that detail, but That's one of the strengths of their proposals. There were many, but that was one of them.
And then finally, can you or maybe staff talk about our the degree to which aggregated data will be accessible to the city to use for our information about trip information and as well as the basics of the parking information and all of that?
Absolutely. So Nice Ride has been making all of that kind of data available to the city, to researchers, to the public, to the maximum extent possible from the day we were born. And we will make sure that that continues going forward. Two specific kind of data to worry about. One is real-time data. Nice Ride actually led the charge to create an international standard for how real-time data is published for the bike share industry. That is written into the contract that we're going to be signing with Motivate. Motivate also has been a company that has really pushed for that. And I will point out a key difference between the two different types of companies you see operating in the shared use mobility sphere. They'll both talk a good game about sharing data. But when you push them for their real-time data, there are some that say, I will comply with the international standard, and I will ask my users to sign something that opens it up so that city planners can use their trip data for planning purposes. Motivate does that now and will continue to do that under the contract that we will sign. All these new startups are not doing that. They won't even tell you how many bikes they have on the street in San Diego or Dallas right now.
Thank you. That's a really important point.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. And I think Nice Ride's been a pretty big success for the city so far. I've got some concerns about the changes and moving to this other system. So the dockless system relies on smartphone technology and some kind of app in order to access the bicycles?
Councilman Gordon, yes, that's correct.
So there'll no longer be a fob or a key device that communicates only with Nice Ride. It will be an app, and information will then be shared with some other company.
So I'm going to start on the access point and then the data sharing point, because I think you raised two. On the access point, Motivate is developing now a lock on their bicycle that has multiple access points. So I could use an app, but I could also use my GoTo Card. So in the contract that I'm signing with them, they are committing to have the GoTo Card access by 2019.
And is the Metropolitan Council agreeing to that? I mean, who controls the GoTo Card?
So you're correct. It is Metropolitan Council, but that's something that, yes, they have wanted for a long time and something that we're going to now get. So we have worked with the Met Council towards user interface integration on multiple fronts for a long time and have made some progress there. I could spend a lot of time on that one.
Well, that's fantastic news. I appreciate that. So when you're using your GoTo Card, there wouldn't be much information that's being transmitted to the user then, right? Or to Motivate, except they know who's got the bike. So what about when you're using your app? How much information then does Motivate get about you, and what do they do with that information?
So you are correct that when you use an app, or today when you use your key fob, our back end knows where you started your trip and where you end your trip. We do release data that is anonymous so that we don't tie a trip to a user. And we've been doing that all along, and that is kind of the standard for how to do this. We do not use that data for any other purpose.
Excellent. And will you maintain that when it's on the app, or will Motivate have access to the trip information and the identity of the traveler?
So Motivate will have that information because they host the back end. So the contract is with them. But they will maintain the same privacy policy.
So how does Motivate make money on this deal?
So Motivate has always made money from two sources. One is sponsorship. So they have large sponsors in New York and San Francisco like City Bike and Ford. Here, we have invited Motivate to negotiate a new sponsorship agreement with Blue Cross. Blue Cross has been our title sponsor from the beginning. They are negotiating a title sponsorship now. I've heard from both of them that that negotiation is going well. So that's one key revenue stream. The other revenue stream is sales of memberships and trips. So that is their business model and has been their business model.
So they won't be using it to sell advertising to users who have the app?
So I can't say whether they have any advertising on the app. That is possible. I believe they do that now. They do not sell information about a user's activities to other advertisers.
Well, that's good to hear, I guess. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Well, since I'm the one asking about privacy today, I'll add on to Councilmember Gordon's questions around data sharing. Is there a data retention policy around how long we'll maintain personally identifying information? I guess I'll just say I'm wondering. I recognize that we've committed to not sort of publicly sharing that information, but if government agencies were to subpoena a record of everywhere I've biked from and to over a period of time, how long do we have that information in the database?
So I believe the answer is 6 years today. Nice Ride has a back end system, and I could go back 6 years and find trip data. So which rider started and where they started and ended their trip.
So I'll just make a comment that I wonder if we should look at that in the contract that we're in the process of revising to see if some significantly shorter period of time might be appropriate for at least personally identifiable data in relationship to data privacy. I understand the huge benefit to having anonymized data so that we can figure out patterns and usage and a lot of those issues, but I would caution about sort of creating a database about people's comings and goings.
So I'm going to commit to bring that one to the North American Bike Share Association. They're kind of digging into these issues that have been raised. That's an organization that we helped create that I think is another thing that stems from the work of this council. So
that's great. Thank you. And then one other question. When I was in DC recently, I think the thing that people complained about the most about the dockless bike sharing there was bikes that were left overturned. And it's unclear to me whether the users were doing that or whether they're getting knocked over by the wind or whatever else. But I'm wondering, is there any technology on the bikes, or is this something that's been contemplated to at least note whether it's upright at the time it's being returned so that we can know that users are returning them in an upright position? Because I think that makes a huge difference in people's experience of dockless, whether they're knocked over or whether they're standing upright.
Thank you, Councilmember. The answer to that is they're working on it. So I am not aware of anyone who has that technology on the bike, but we recognize that that's part of order in the right-of-way, and we want to solve that problem. And there is an education part of that, there is a good site plan part of that, and there's a technology side of that, and we're going to work on all of those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Gossett? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. And now I will invite Mr. Joshua Hodek to come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good morning, Chair Reich, committee members. My name is Joshua Hodek. I serve on the Bicycle Advisory Committee. I am a Nice Ride user, a personal bike commuter, a transit rider, a walker, a carpooler, and a driver. I'm excited to see dockless bike share coming to Minneapolis. We are now entering uncharted territory, as we've been listening this morning. As we transition to a new dynamic system, I support the amendment to the bicycle ordinance, but I do want to make these comments with the transition. 2 main points here. I strongly support the plan to continue working exclusively with Nice Ride. There are many benefits to this arrangement, such as dealing only with one entity to work out inevitable issues that will arise. But I am concerned, however, about dockless bike sharing will equitably provide to all of our city's residents. Exclusivity is a major tool to ensure that virtual stations are provided in every neighborhood in our city. But during this transition, we should provide flexibility to try out different ways to park all our bikes. So I just encourage you to continue looking at this ordinance, and thank you for your attention to it.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else sign in? Anyone else signed in? Does anyone wish to come forward and make comment? Anyone wish to come forward? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, I just had a question because we talked a lot about exclusivity, but when I read the ordinance doesn't stipulate any kind of exclusivity to anybody. It just talks about you need a contract or a license to operate a bike share. So I just want to be clear that when we get to that exclusivity piece, that's going to be in the contract that we're going to yet be negotiating and approving.
Yeah, Councilmember Gordon, you've laid it out perfectly. We wanted to have a base ordinance that could contemplate different scenarios, but of course very amenable to the scenario that we are contemplating through the contract and the agreement that would be pertained in that. So,
thanks. Just wanted to clarify that for myself and everybody.
Well, thank you. And actually, it was a good commentary that was made by the inquiries of clarification that happened, and the presenters, of course, were very edifying as well. I think Council President put it very succinctly in the place that we're in, and we're in a place where we can be a little bit ahead of the curve and start to have some foundational work done, and then also some great detailed conversation that would set us up moving forward when we activate this new generation of bike sharing, which I think has a lot of upsides that we understand before us, but we also know amazing challenges if you don't do it right. I've been to a couple of those cities and I've seen the YouTube videos, and it's anywhere from disconcerting to just downright messy and scary. So I think we're trying to avoid that and do it well. And I think the commentary that we've had from our advocates is spot on. This is Minneapolis. We believe in access. We believe in universal access. And how we get there, of course, is the work that we have before us. So I appreciate all those comments. And again, Council President, for your succinct description of where we're at in your comment. Any further discussion? Councilmember Gordon?
So the notion of the business district and where you can't ride on sidewalks and not is, I don't know that we can take that up today necessarily, but I do know that we talk about commercial corridors. We might have a better defined city definition of that so we can narrow in on that. I certainly have sympathy, especially and concern about the equity issue and who gets tickets, where do they get tickets. I think there might be a reason why we might want to do citations with it, but clearly it's an educational issue and a signage issue, and maybe there's some direction we can do around that. And if there's an amendment prepared today, I'm ready to support it and consider it, but if not, we still might have time to refine some language, even if we move it forward with recommendation at the council. So I just wanted to say I'm open and interested in that issue in particular.
Yeah, in testimony, and you brought it up as well, there's kind of three issues there. One, I believe our guidelines are commercial districts as defined by the zoning code. I see a knowledgeable staff person here to say something about that.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, we definitely did hear that comment, and I think it is outside of what we are bringing forward today, but we would be happy to go back through that ordinance and see what recommendations we might bring forward in the future.
Yeah, and you know, the three pieces we have to look at are clarification of how we define it. I think right now we define it through our commercial designation, but we want to keep the ordinance somewhat generic because terminology changes over time. We're doing a comp plan and we are changing our categorical designation. So for example, what was industrial, we propose to be named something else, so a different word. So that's one guideline, but I think the stronger point that was raised was education and clarity and uniform application. So on Central Avenue, we had some signage on the sidewalks that said, this is a commercial area and it's prohibited for all kinds of safety reasons. But you can go to an equally dynamic commercial node in my ward, Johnson Street, no such thing exists. So, and I use both very frequently. So the absence of one, does that negate the rule or does it not? So I think those are very practical considerations. And then in terms of, you know, beyond education, I think the whole citation thing, we've got data, we have analysis, now we have to respond to it. And we appreciate our partners for putting that together. And I think that's an enforcement piece that we will have to share with our enforcement divisions. So all good points, and we're going to definitely work on all of them and have a package moving forward that will be a complement to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question for Mr. Wirtjes about the virtual stations. Something that I'm most excited about around this plan is something that came to us early this morning in a comment too, which is to make bike share financially viable in less densely populated corners of the city. I know, for example, the Lyndhurst neighborhood just got their Nice Ride station last year, and they were so excited about it. In places that are less densely populated but have great destinations, can you explain the virtual docking station? And I know we've talked about there's going to be a lot of them. I had originally understood that it was simply a portion of the right-of-way, but pretty much the right-of-way everywhere. Are you saying that it is only in certain corridors, or could you just help me understand where the virtual places are to leave and to pick up bicycles a little bit better? Because I just think there's some confusion in the different kinds of feedback we've been getting.
Mr. Chair and Council Member Palmisano, let me first clarify your question. Your questions are related not to the ordinance, but to these pending future agreements. And so I want to let people know that.
Right.
Our dialogue, and as Mr. Gossett has indicated already to date, it's an evolving conversation relative to virtual stations. And so we want some flexibility, but we also don't want overt prescription on how we're defining virtual stations and how we're trying to pilot as many ideas that we can. And so I have also seen those comments I think you referenced this morning, and I think there's a lot of ideas out there on how we can maybe do virtual stations in a number of different means and methods, still within a framework that Nice Ride would continue to operate and control and propose those solutions back in a dialogue with the community.
Okay, thank you.
You're
I'm
welcome.
satisfied with that for now.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think Councilmember Palmisano brings up a question that anyone who represents, and three of us do, the far corners of the city, particularly as neighborhoods finally got theirs, as they put it, and as the system grew out, that it would not shrink down. And of course, when it's virtual, people say, well, now that it's virtual, why can't you go to Waite Park in the far corner of the city? And so those things will be definitely pressing conversations from our constituents. So thank you. Councilmember Vander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to again highlight how much I think we all appreciate the partnership with Nice Ride and your openness to, even going forward from today, taking another look at this contract and making sure that the level of specificity is there to really codify in the contract all of these things that we've been working on together for a number of years around equity, around access to the stations, around having a public view on station locations, on having a way to adjust as we go forward. I think we all appreciate the way that the current agreement phases in the number of bikes that we'll be seeing, so we have time to adjust as needed as we go and not have a huge influx of bikes all at once. So, and I also just really appreciated all the attention to detail from the people who came to speak today, from the Bicycle Advisory Committee and from our streets and the others who've engaged in this, so that we do as best we can to get it right as we start this new kind of adventure in bike sharing in Minneapolis. And again, as I hear stories from other cities, I just want to say that we're really fortunate to have this partnership here that gives us so much more control as we sort of tiptoe into this new market, to have a nonprofit partner at the helm, being able to put in the time and have the public benefit and good in mind as well.
Well put. Any other comments, Councilmember Palmisano? Okay. Well, with that, I will move item 5, which is the regulation of bicycle sharing ordinance and the passage of the ordinance amending Title 18, Chapter 490 of our code. Any further discussion? See none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. And as we are postponing the discussion item for the next cycle, that concludes our agenda, and we are thereby adjourned. Thank you.